Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Good afternoon. My name is Joan Lagana, and I'm a very grateful member of the Worldwide Fellowship of Al-Anon Family Groups. Hi, everyone. And I'm so honored and privileged to be here today. I want to thank Shirali for all her beautiful hospitality and wonderful phone calls and letters and notes and allowing me to bring my lovely daughter Kathleen with me. I thank you for that. And I want to thank especially my good friends, Sally and Keith. You know, I've known Sally and Keith for 30 years. We used to go to meetings together in Franklin Square, Long Island. And we used to go for ice cream together after the meetings. And last year, Joe and I were in Hawaii. We were invited guests at the Big Island Bash. And Sally and Keith were there. And they followed us from the Big Island over to Waikiki because we prolonged our little stay. And you know what? We went for ice cream after the meetings. Isn't that great? Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that the circle that, you know, everything comes back? So I'm very grateful for that. And I'm grateful that Sally said to me and Joe last year, you have to come to the Big Island, the powwow next year. And we got all hepped up, and we were very excited. And when Shirali called me, I got excited again. So I'm grateful to be here. Thank you, all of you. I think the biggest problem I have right now is how am I going to get that beautiful gift basket that you left in my room back home to Long Island? Kathleen said it won't fit in the overhead compartment of the plane. But it's beautiful, and I'd love to take it to my new home. But God will give us an answer if I wait. And I've got another day here. So I said I'm grateful to be here, and I really meant that from the bottom of my heart. And gratitude is, you know, the key to my journey today, gratitude. I was born in the Bronx, and I met so many people since I came here, including Sister Maurice and Sister Rose, who we flew down together on the plane. We had a great time at the airport. You know, here I am walking in the airport. I wasn't walking in the airport. When I got into the airport Friday morning, they got me a wheelchair because Kathleen says, Mom, you're never going to make it to the gate. There's a long walk. So they get me a wheelchair and they push me. I really feel like a queen now, you know. And they push me to this gate, and I'm being pushed there. And I says, there's one little, you know, gray-haired lady. I says, and she looks very bright, and she looks Irish. I bet you that's Sister Maurice. But she was alone. So we sat, we took seats, and then I saw Sister Rose come back and sit with her. And Sister Maurice stood up and turned around with her hands on her hips, you know, and she's looking around at me. And she's staring at me. But I says, I'll be very ladylike, and I'll go to the ladies' room first, which I did. And when I came out, you know, that little bit of courage that we have in Al-Anon today came up, and I went right over to them, and I said, Sister Maurice and Sister Rose? And she said, I knew this was you. Isn't that wonderful? We have courage today that we're able to do those things. And we had a great time talking and sharing and coming down on this little plane together. It was wonderful. And I felt so good I was able to show them, just past that mountain there and you're going to see Palm Springs. Why? Because we were here in '97. Joe and I were here in '97. Joe was one of your speakers, and we had such a wonderful time, and you treated us so beautifully, and here I am back again. So now I'll tell you my Al-Anon story. what it was like, what we went through, and what it's like today. And I stand here today, a woman that's full of grace, and God's grace is with me, and I got that through the rooms of Al-Anon, through gratitude, with the peace and understanding that I've gotten through the fellowship with all of you. I was born in the Bronx, and I was born to a mom and dad who were very lovely people. They were from Europe. I had an older brother who was 7 years older than me, and a younger sister who was 5 years younger than me, and till today she loves to tell me that she's 5 years younger than me. And I love it. I just called her this morning because she hasn't been feeling well. And my dad, I could say that he drank a lot, but I couldn't call him an alcoholic, but I just knew that when he drank, it made me afraid of him. And when he didn't drink, he was a beautiful person. He read us stories at night. He brushed our hair after a bath. We'd watch the Grand Ole Opry on a Saturday night. I'm giving away my age, And he was a very loving man, and if a thunder and lightning storm came and we were afraid, he'd be the one that came into our room, and comforted us. And my dad died when I was 13, and at that time in my life, it made me a very lonely young lady because my world revolved around my family, but it meant my mom had to go out to work. And when Mom went out to work, she was a milliner, and she worked in Manhattan, so she used to leave the home every morning at 7 a.m. And my brother at that time was married, and it left me a caretaker for a younger sister. So I cared for her. We got up together. We had breakfast together. I dropped her off at her school, and then I went to my school. I was in junior high, and she was in grade school. And at 3 o'clock, when I got home from school, I would pick up my sister, bring her home to the apartment up in the Bronx. We'd do our homework together, and by 5 o'clock, I would start dinner. My sister was too young to cook. And Mom would come home, and our whole world revolved around our family life. Mom, my sister, and me. And we were content. We had a huge family. Mom had 7 sisters and brothers. And they were very nice. There was a lot of drinking there. But I didn't live with them. I lived with Mom. But my brother, I'll never forget, brought me a typewriter, an old Underwood typewriter. And I used to lock myself in my room and write all these short stories that I wish one day I wish I would have had a very well-to-do family. You know how children wish and have dreams? And I wish one day that some Prince Charming would carry me off into the wild blue yonder and buy me a house with a white picket fence that we'd have happily ever after. Now, I'm a girl from the Bronx, and we had no green outside our house. We had cement blocks outside our house and sidewalks. And the only green I saw was in the lot in the back of the house. I was sharing it with Kathleen this morning, where we used to go out and dig when we were little kids, because that was the place to go. I'm grateful for those days. I'm really grateful for them because they gave me a lot of things to think about. And by the time I was 15 and 16, I'll never forget, my mom used to say to us, we're not allowed to date until we're 16. Now, she had 2 young girls, and in those days when your mom told you weren't allowed to date until you're 16, you listened. You really listened. And the first boy that ever asked me for a date, I was about 15 years old, and he lived across the street from me. And we used to play basketball together with a whole group of us, and softball. I was a good sport in those days. I was much thinner than I am now. And I had long, brown, mousy hair and all those goody things that you think back, oh my God, how did I ever survive? But we used to go to the schoolyard and play, which was right next to my apartment building. And he was a good friend of ours, and they used to show movies on a Saturday afternoon. And there were only 10 cents to get in to see these movies. And he came over and he rang the doorbell one day and he asked Mom if he could take me to a movie. And Mom says, well, I don't allow my girls to date until they're 16. He says, it's not a date, Mrs. Bayer. He says, we're just going to the movies next door. And she says, well, I'm sorry, I can't allow her to go. That boy was... Oh, God, all of a sudden, I forgot his name. Colin Powell. Colin Powell asked me out on my first date. Could you believe it? I don't think that he remembers it as much as I do. But I do because, as time went on, we went to high school together. We both went to Morris High School. So as we went to high school together, and then he graduated and went on and on and on, I says, oh my God, that is the boy that asked me out on my first date. And my sister says, are you going to always hold this against me? But, that was a wonderful time in my life. By the time I was 16 and 17, I had those vivid dreams, and they just kept going on, and I wrote a lot of short stories, and I never wanted anybody to see them, like we write in our journals today. We write in our journals, and we pour our heart out in them, and we hide them under the mattress or in the drawer or where nobody could see it. But, when I was 19, my girlfriend called me one date, and I was angry at this boy I was seeing, and she says to me, Joan, Phil brought a friend home from the ship this weekend. Her husband was in the Navy. And she says, I'd like you to come on a blind date tonight. Would you like to go? And I, being spiteful, I says, of course I would. I really wanted to go on this blind date. And she says, he'll be there at 7 o'clock to pick you up. I said, wonderful. 7 o'clock that night, I was all ready to go. And the doorbell rang. And Mom says, it must be for you, Joan. Answer it. And I opened the door, and there he stood. There he stood in all his grandeur. I get chills just thinking of it. He was an olive-skinned. I thought he was just Italian, but I learned he was Italian and Irish. And he had on a white Navy uniform. And there's nothing like a guy in a uniform to turn a girl on, especially those Navy whites. They brought every charming factor out about him. And we went out on our first date, and I fell in love. And it was almost like the big book says, if you want what I have, and you're willing to go to any lengths, well, you know what? I would have went to any lengths. But he never asked me to go to any lengths, because there was a lot of respect and love there. And 4 months later, after going out with Joe for a long time, for months, and he was in the Navy, so we didn't see each other all the time. In fact, he was grounded in New York. He was stationed on the USS Wisconsin, and it was it hit mud in New York Harbor, and they had a long time towing it out. So we were very lucky because he was home every weekend. He used to get leave every weekend. But what happened in those months is we dated, and we both knew we loved each other, and he had a lot of respect for me and I for him. And 4 months later, I was a this was in September. In February, I was a bridesmaid at my other girlfriend's weddings. Girls got married very young in those ages, 18, 19, and 20 years old. So my biggest dream was to get married. Like I said, as a child, I wanted to get married somebody and live in that house with the white picket fence. And I was at a bridesmaid in my girlfriend Fanny's wedding. And I was sitting up at the dais with all the bridesmaids during the reception. I was watching Joe at that big round table down there with all his friends, and they were drinking and having a great time. But that song, I Only Have Eyes for You, that was the song. I only had eyes for him. I didn't care what he was drinking. He was out of the Navy by then, just discharged, and he looked so handsome that night. And when it came time for the bride to throw the bouquet, well, I went out on the floor and I said, oh, please, God, let me catch this bouquet, and maybe he'll ask me to marry him tonight. Can you imagine at 19 wanting that to happen? And I went out on the floor and I did catch that bouquet, And then it came time for the groom to throw the garter, and Joe went out on the floor with a bunch of other fellas, but he didn't catch the garter. And you know what they do. They put that girl that caught the bouquet up in the middle of the floor, on the dance floor, and the guy that catches the garter has to put the garter up on her leg. And I have this cutesy little strapless light blue gown on, and this guy's putting the garter up on my leg, and everybody on the wedding is saying, higher, higher, and they're playing this Gypsy Rose Lee music, And I'm really sitting there enjoying this whole effect. But out of the corner of my eye, I see this cute little guy come running across the room and pick up the guy that's on his knee in front of me, pick him up by the collar, and slug him. And with that, the photographer snapping pictures, and my girls are saying, oh, isn't that great? My friends, isn't that great, I am totally embarrassed, and I get up from that chair, and I'll never speak to him again, and I never want to see him again. And I ran out of that wedding, and I got a lift home. And as I got home and walked in the apartment, Mom says to me, "Joe called 5 times." I says, well, indignant. "Well, if he calls again, I'm not home." And she says, "Joan, you can take care of your own problems." It was like Mom had Al-Anon before Al-Anon was even around, and with that phone rang. That phone on the kitchen wall? Well, maybe you young girls don't know about it, but us older ones remember. One phone in the house on the kitchen wall with a short cord. You couldn't go anywhere. Everybody who was in the kitchen knew what you were talking about. I really didn't want to answer that phone because I knew that it would be him but I did answer the phone, and he said, "Joan, I am so sorry that happened tonight, and I had 1 beer too many." And you know what? I believed him. Because everything he ever told me, I believed him. Those promises. But he says, "I'm so sorry that happened, and I had 1 beer too many, and it'll never happen again. And will you marry me?" And you know what I said? I said, "Yes." Because in my heart, I said, "You are the man I've been waiting for." And I said, "Yes," but in my heart, I also said, well, if he marries a Joni good girl from the Bronx, I could change him. You will agree, right? Don't we all come in here thinking we could change someone else? This is a program of change, but the only one we can change is ourselves. The only one, So we started that merry little road of love, and God, that was February, that's September, we got married. In those days, it was so simple. We planned a wedding. We went to the church first. The priest said, "Wonderful, get married, 2 kids." We didn't even have to go for any training. My girls ought to have to go for training today at the church, to make sure and sign agreements and everything else. Imagine if we had to do that then. Oh, God. So anyway, we got married the following September, that September of the same year. And I had my dream of my honeymoon. We were going to the Poconos in Pennsylvania for our honeymoon. I've never gotten to the Poconos. I can honestly tell you today, I've never gotten to the Poconos. We left for our honeymoon that night, and we took off our tux. He took off his tux. I took off my gown. We hung it at Mom's, and we went out. And he says to me, "We're going over the George Washington Bridge." He says, "I have to make 1 stop." I said, "Okay." I figured, well, isn't this nice? He went into a little liquor store, and I says, "Isn't this sweet?" He's going to come out with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. I figured the glasses would be in between his fingers like this, and a rose between his teeth. I'm having like a commercial in my head, and I'm sitting in the little car, and he comes dashing out with a little brown bag. A little brown bag, and he got in the car, and he opened it up, and he says, "You want a swig?" That was a little bottle of Jack Daniels. We spent 1 night in New Jersey at a motel, and the next day we were home. We were home. There began my road to alcoholism. And the isms were me. I carried so many character defects into my marriage because my expectations always got in the way. I had a lot of character defects. I couldn't blame it all on him, but I sure didn't help any either, So then we began all the broken promises. My mom used to tell me, "Joan, if you make your man a good meal every night, and when he comes home from work, and if you're all cleaned up and the house is beautifully clean, put on a little white apron, light a candle at the table, and you'll live a happy life together, both of you." I did all those things. But the problem is he never even came home. He would call me from work and say, "I'm going to be a little late. I'm working a little OT." Okay, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 6 hours. So the things came off the stove, and they covered up in Pyrex dishes. We didn't have Tupperware then, Pyrex dishes, put it on the stove. Then after a while, the stove was no good, so I put it in the refrigerator. And about 3 months into my marriage, I says to him, I was lonely. I was so lonely. And you know what? The big thing was, I look back now, even till today, I never shared that with anybody. I didn't tell my mom, I didn't tell my family, and I sure didn't tell my friends that my husband didn't come home at night. I mean, don't get me wrong, when he did come home, we were lovey-dovey and wonderful and hunky-dory, and I forgot everything. I was just so grateful that he was home. But I didn't want to tell anybody, you know, and how many times do we do that today? You know, we push it under the rug, we shove it in the closet, you know, just don't talk about it. When I was growing up, my mom used to tell me, never take secrets from the house, out of the house. Keep them in your heart. They'll go away in time. So, you know, old things you keep and you treasure them and they just go on and on. And I says to him, we were married 3 months, I says, Joe, I think we need a baby. He says, a baby? We're only married 3 months and we're young. And I says, oh, I'd love to have a baby. See, I'd love to have a baby because I needed somebody to take care of. I needed somebody to be there with me all the time because he wasn't. And I says, let's just try once. You know, in those days you used that good Catholic method of birth control. And he says to me, oh, okay, you know. Well, that's why I guess today we had 7 children, you know. We must have tried 7 times. But anyway, so 9 months later, on our wedding anniversary, we had our first daughter, Debbie. I'm the proud mother of 5 daughters and 2 sons. I'm so grateful for that. Thank you, God. And we had Debbie. But you know, Joe took me to the hospital to give birth to Debbie, and he brought me home from the hospital, and he stayed home for 1 week with me, taking care of me and Debbie. And I'll use a little bit of your story too, Joe, because you say it all the time. But after a week, I got thirsty. So he left again, you know, and did his thing. But I had Debbie. I had this wonderful little baby in my life who was healthy and beautiful and exuberant. But then I started that other life. You know, when he didn't come home, I'd put Debbie in the stroller in the middle of the night and go looking for him in the bar, because I didn't want him to get an automobile accident coming home, and I wanted to bring him home. I know a lot of you identify with these feelings. I'm being very honest with you. My sponsees today say to me, you're the greatest person to talk to because you really let your hair down. Yes, I do. I remember the window watchers looking out the window, oh, after that 6th blue car comes down the street, maybe his will come down, you know, waiting there. I remember one night, laying in bed, and I was so angry at him. My little girl was then 3 years old, and so angry at him for all of the things, you know, for coming home in the middle of the night. When he used to come home in the middle of the night and demand a meal, he used to come in like a lion, ferocious, you know. And, you know, without Al-Anon, we do a lot of things. And this one particular night, what I noticed, and I really noticed it, and it still happens today, is we had a big Irish setter dog. He was beautiful. He was sleek. And sometimes Joe used to take him out for a walk and get lost for 2 or 3 days because the setter, too, liked beer. He used to love to go into the bars and drink beer. But what happened is this, you know, when Joe used to come home and he never hit me. He was not a drunk that was angered at me. I think he was angered at himself for doing what he did. And he would yell and scream and make a commotion and demand a meal in the middle of the night. And you know what would happen when he walked through the door? The Irish setter would always try to hide under our bed. And you know, he never fit under our bed. He never fit. And I would notice that the fish in the fish tank would hide behind the rocks. And the biggest thing I noticed was my plants would droop. The family disease of alcoholism affects many living creatures, not only we humans, but plant life and animal life too. Believe me that it does. You know, one night he came home and he demanded a meal, and I says to him, well, I made veal cutlets. And he says, I don't want that. Now, this is 2:30 in the morning. What would you like, Joe? I was such a people pleaser. What would you like, dear? I want chili. I says, chili? You know, so I got to the stove. There I am making this chili. And as I'm making it for him, I'm bitter and I'm resentful and I'm angry that he woke me up, and I didn't want him to wake our little daughter up in her bedroom. So I was trying to be quiet, and he was talking loudly. And all he was saying, "Is it ready yet?" And I'm putting more hot chili powder in it. I'm trying to make it the hottest chili he ever had in his life, you know. And as I'm doing it, you know, his head is falling closer and closer to the dish because he's falling asleep at the table. You know, I just picked up that cast iron frying pan and I hit him over the head with it. And he fell flat out on the floor. And I said, "Oh my God, I killed him." All of a sudden, the whole scene came back to me. I'm going to have to call the police. I killed him. But I bent down and felt his pulse. He had a pulse. So I went in the bedroom and I put a pillow under his head. And I took a blanket off the bed and I covered him. And when he woke up in the morning, he was rubbing his head like this. And I said, "You came home like that." You know, they talk about the alcoholics talk about having a blackout. Don't we have blackouts? Honestly, I've had a few blackouts in my life. And I never shared that story until 17 years ago, I was speaking up at an AA convention up in SONY, New York. And I'm standing up at the podium, and there's Joe amongst the audience in the front, and my sponsor, and about 10 of my sponsees. They're all down there giving me support, you know, and about 1,000 AAs, you know, and that story came to mind. And all of a sudden, I realized, my God, I never made an amends for that. So I stood proudly up in front of that microphone, and I made an amends to Joe that night, publicly. Because I says, this way he'll always have it. He'll always have it on record. You know, but that's humility that we get into this program. We stripped away of that pride and we have humility. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for those times, you know. So after many years, our little girl was almost 4, and Joe came home after being out of the house about 2 nights. And he came home and stood in the doorway, you know, banging both sides. And he knew he was going to get a lecture from me. Again, I always made myself feel like his mom. He was older than me, but I always felt like his mom because I was always lecturing him. And he says to me, "I know what my problem is," before I even opened up my mouth. And I says, "What is it?" And he says, "It's New York that gets me drunk." I said, "Well, okay, where do you want to go, Joe?" And he says, "Let's move to Milwaukee, Wisconsin." Now, you all know that that's the beer capital of the world, but I didn't. And being such a naive person, see, a lot of my character defects are coming out now. Being such a naive person, you know what? The next week, we were moving to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We had Santini brothers come to the house and even pack all our furniture and china. They moved everything out there, lock, stock, and barrel. And we went out there and we rented a house with option to buy. Did we know anybody in Milwaukee? No. But I went. I would have followed him anywhere. I always said I would have lived in a tent with him. I still would live in a tent with him, you know? And we went out there, and oh, God, it was terrible out there. The disease comes with you, you know. You want to move. You take a geographic, but you take yourselves with you. I was still bickering and fighting, and he was still drinking, and oh, my God, just carrying on. And what happened in that time, though, and I always think, you know, God has a, you know, never tell God what you're going to do tomorrow, because it's in his plan. It's in his life, you know. And he knew that we needed this to hit our bottom, maybe. And going out there, you know, what happened was I found myself in a place that I was dying to share. I was bursting. My heart was bursting. And I started to eventually open up to my mom, because she used to make those daily phone calls to me in Milwaukee. And Mom, the only thing Mom ever said to me is, "Joan, if you and Joe ever want to come back to New York, come back and I'll let you live with me in my apartment and I'll give you 1 bedroom. Weren't we lucky we would have had a roof over our head?" And I approached Joe finally one night when things were really tough. He made money out there. He was a good provider always for us, always. And, but I was not happy. And you know, it was God's grace that he says to me one day, "We'll do that. We'll pack up and go home." We put our furniture in storage, and the only thing we packed up then was my little girl's furniture and our personal items, you know, clothing and stuff. And I found myself driving home 1,000 miles from Milwaukee in the car with my spouse. and I had my little girl who was then 4, and I was pregnant with my second child. And that was in October of 1961. You know, when we came back to New York, I was so embarrassed and devastated to come back into my mom's house and live. After all, God, I'm a grown woman. Here I am, I'm 25 years old. I should be living on my own. I should be happy, joyous, and free. I should have all those wonderful things. A home of my own, you know. But I didn't. Here I was coming back. I had furniture left in Milwaukee, in Wisconsin, in storage. You know, they talk about the alcoholic being down on his luck, you know, and losing everything. We lost everything. I never got back that furniture that was in storage in Milwaukee, never. How important was it to me? When I look back now, it wasn't. It was part of our recovery. But when we came back in 61, the first thing I did was get to a doctor and try to get help for myself to help me with my pregnancy. And I did. I signed up in a clinic because there were no doctors. We didn't even have hospitalization. But Joe was wonderful. He got a job the first day. I said, isn't this great? We're back in New York. He got a job the first day. We're going to be just fine. He'll have hospitalization in 3 months. But little did I know, and as he told me later on, he needed that job so that he could continue his drinking, and that was important to him. So what I did in those days is, you know, as a child growing up, I had a God of my understanding was my religion, and it was based on that. And in the years of alcoholism, I look back now, in the first 5 years of my marriage, I had lost that God. I wasn't praying to God and asking him. I was asking him to do things for me, and then I would do things for him. I wasn't praying to him like I learned to pray to him as a child, like I talk to him today. You know, and I lost that God of my understanding, and it was so important that I recognized that. But what I did is I turned myself towards the saints in the church, and we were very close to Immaculate Conception Church living with my mom, and I used to walk down there every day with Debbie, and I used to light these candles. First, I started on St. Patrick. I says, well, after all, Joe's mom is Irish. I'll pray to St. Patrick and ask St. Patrick to help Joe stop drinking. I didn't even know the word alcoholism. Just have him stop drinking. Oh, St. Patrick, if you get Joe to stop drinking, I'll go to all these novenas at church that they're having. I'll go to Mass every Sunday. I'll do anything you want me to do. Just get him to stop drinking. Well, in those days, I had no patience, and after a month, I didn't get my answer. And I says, why should St. Patrick answer me? He's Irish, he's probably a drunk too. So I figured I'm praying to the wrong saint. I'll try St. Anthony, because after all, Joe's father was Italian, and St. Anthony, you know. So St. Anthony, if you get Joe to stop drinking, that was another month, you know, that was in November. If you get Joe to stop drinking, St. Anthony, I'll name all my children after you. Be careful what you pray for. I had 7 children, and 5 of them were girls. And you want to know something? My sons have the middle name Anthony, and my daughters have the middle name Ann. I'm so grateful that I kept that promise. And I kept that promise after all. After all. You know, a month later, St. Anthony's prayers didn't come true either, and it was December and Christmas, and it was a horrible Christmas, and everything was going on, and I was devastated by this, and I just couldn't wait to have this baby, and I was going to end my marriage. Can you imagine at 25, I was going to give up? I'm so grateful today that I didn't give up before the miracle happened and before God had his other plan for me. Today, I could honestly say that I'm grateful I married an alcoholic. I can honestly say that. You know, that was in December, you know, and on January 1st, I can't tell Joe's story, he told it here. On January 1st, 1962, he said to me after being in the hospital that night and having a blackout and waking up green, and he says to me, would you call Alcoholics Anonymous? And I says, where did you hear about that? He says, never mind, just call them. This is the number. And I did. And he asked me for 2 tokens to go down on the subway train with. And I gave him 2 tokens to go down on the subway train with. And when he left the house that day, in order for him to get out of the house that day, I had to shave him, shower him, and dress him because he was incapable of doing it himself. And he left that day, and I honestly prayed that he would never come back again. But I'm so grateful that he did. because he brought with him a gift when he came home. And the gift was that he was going to go to a meeting that night, and someone was going to call him in the afternoon. And it was a terrible day, the rest of the day that he came home. But I went through just what you usually go through. You're watching them, you're watching. And that night he went out to a meeting. It was a Wednesday night. And he was gone about an hour and a half. And that kitchen phone rang on the wall. You know, we were living with my mom yet. That kitchen phone rang on the wall, and I picked it up. And the man on the other end said, "Hello, is this Joan?" I says, "Yes." He says, "My name is Jean." I says, "Okay, do I know you?" He says, "I'm Joe's sponsor." I said, "His confirmation sponsor?" I didn't know anything about a sponsor. And he says, "No, I'm his AA sponsor, and he's here at an AA meeting." I says, "Oh, I know that." And he says, "Do you have any booze in the house?" And I said, "Oh my God, they're all going to come back here and drink." That was truly my honest reaction. What did I know about Alcoholics Anonymous? What did I know about sponsor? You know, and he says, "I want you to get rid of it." And my stupid question said to him was, "Do you know how much that cost?" He says, "Just get rid of it." I says, "How?" He says, "Dump it down the sink. Just don't have any there when we get home." But you know, Gene came back to the house that night with Joe, and he sat with us for 2 hours, Joe, myself, and my mom, and he talked to us all about Alcoholics Anonymous. And when he was ready to leave, I wanted Gene to stay and Joe to go. Because I fell in love with Gene, and I fell in love with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, and he says to Joe that night, "Be downstairs on the corner at 7 o'clock. I'll be there to pick you up." And Joe says, "Suppose it's raining." And he says, "Then you'll get wet." So I loved him. You know why I loved him? Because Joe is a tough little guy, and this guy was tougher. So God always sends you not who you need, he sends you not who you want, he sends you who you need, and he needed him. I always thought I could do all of those things for Joe, but I couldn't. Don't we all think we could do these things for our alcoholic? So Joe started going to meetings, and that letter today from Bill brought it all forward to me, because what Bill said in that beautiful letter, that's who we were. Now, these were the days in 1962. Al-Anon then was only 9 years old. I didn't know about Al-Anon. Gene didn't tell us about Al-Anon because he never had a wife. He never got married. And you know, AA then was, 12 years old? 62? AA was 12 years old. Well, anyway, it was a beautiful thing. All of a sudden, Joe started coming home from work every day. He was coming home from work every day, showering, shaving, putting that foo-foo juice on. You know, when he used to slap that Old Spice on his face, that used to really burn me. I hated the fact, it was almost like a beer can popping. Every time I heard a beer can pop, I'd go crazy. When he slapped this foo-foo on, I'd go just as crazy, because I'd say to myself, he's telling me he's going to AA meetings. I bet you he's going out with other women. I was so untrusting. I don't know if any of you were, but I was very untrusting. And so he started going to meetings every day of the week, twice on Saturday and Sunday. And sometimes he'd go out in a group. They'd come and pick him up in a carload of people, or 2 cars. And if one of the cars that he got into had a woman in it, boy, oh boy, that would set off a trigger in me that would wind me up. So when he'd come home, I'd fire all guns at him. There's a page in our ODAT book that talks about that. You know, we sit behind this wall, and we line up our gunfire, and we want to shoot them all the time. We have to let go of those resentments and those feelings and learn how to forgive, you know. And he was sober about 3 months, and he was active in his group. He was the coffee maker. And I was at home then with a brand new baby boy. I had given birth to my son Joseph 3 months later, 3 weeks after Joe came into AA. And when I woke up from delivering my baby boy, there was my husband standing on one side of my bed, sober. And on the other side was his sponsor, because the sponsors never left them for a minute. You know, if he could have, he would have slept at the house, but he didn't. And So 3 months down the road, I'm still irritable, cranky, restless, discontent. He's running out every night. I'm alone every night. I want him, boy, I want a little piece of this sobriety too. I want him to spend some time with me and the kids. I want to go out to eat. You know, I wanted to get our lives in order. After all, this is what it's all about. You know, I'm 25, he's 26, and boy, this is not going to work. One night he's getting all dolled up to go to this meeting, and I says to him, I don't know where you're going, who you're going with, or what you're doing. And he says to me, what do you mean, Joan? And I says to him, look at you, you get dressed up every night. And he says, you know I'm going to meetings. If you'd like to come with me tonight, you're welcome to come. It's an open meeting. I says, nah, I don't want anything to do with that. Look at how ungrateful I was yet. So ungrateful that I didn't want any part of that. God, today you can't take me away from that. You know, it's given me a life today. So he went out to his meeting. He didn't stay home. He went to his meeting, and he came home that night, and he says to me, well, tomorrow night, he says, I'm going to come home, and we're going to go out to eat a little dinner, and I'm going to take you to a meeting up in the Westchester Square group. I says, boy, he must have really got my message tonight, you know. And that was on April 14th, 1962, that he brought me up to the Westchester Square group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was a little man standing in the front door, Hank Wanamaker. When we walked in, he had a big cigar in his mouth. He says, hi, Joe, how you doing? And Joe introduced me. He says, this is my bride. Joe always called me his bride. Always called me his bride. This is my bride, Joan. And he says, great, let me introduce her to Mary. Mary! And he calls down the hall, and God bless her. This little Irish lady, this tall, with a polka dot dress on, comes walking over to me. She had the biggest boobs I ever saw. You know, this is what always attracted me to Mary, you know, that she dressed so beautifully and she looked so nice, and she took my hand and hugged me, and she says to me, come on, dearie, we're going downstairs to a meeting. I says, oh, they have a meeting downstairs too? She says, no, it's Al-Anon. So she took me to my first Al-Anon meeting that night, you know, and she sat me in the first row in the first seat. And I heard two speakers. There were no step meetings then, no topic meetings. You heard speakers every night. There was one book in Al-Anon then, and it was the Al-Anon family groups. There was a few pieces of literature, not as much as we have today. How fortunate we are today. And I heard two speakers that night. And by the time I heard the second speaker, I figured, well, he came down and told them how I'm acting at home, and that's why they're sharing all of these things, and they really want me to join their club, you know. And Mary came over to me after the speakers were over, and she says, so what did you think, dearie? I says, well, it was very interesting, very good. And I says to her, you see, this thing laying on my mind was still sponsor. What is a sponsor? Joe has a sponsor. There was a little bit of competition then. I wanted to do what he did. I want to go out every night. But I says, what is a sponsor? Do you have sponsors? I heard that women share. She says, you have one, and it's me. Wow. They don't do that today. There's gals in Al-Anon today that walk around 20 years without a sponsor. I don't know how you do it. I need two today. I have one regular sponsor and one service sponsor. I really need two sponsors today. And they know me in and out. They know me in and out. So I'm grateful for that. And they take you through the steps. It's a wonderful way to live. So Mary became my sponsor, and before I left that meeting that night, she gave me a meeting list, and she told me, I want you to go to this meeting, and this meeting, and I says, my hand went up. I can't do that. Meanwhile, I'm looking to go out every night, and I says to her, I can't do that. She says, how come? I says, I have two little children at home. She says, get a sitter. I said, I can't really afford that. She says, then take them with you. I says, I don't have a car. She says, then get on a bus. I says, on a bus with a 4-year-old and a new baby? She says, you just get to the meeting. Somebody will get you home. Can you imagine telling that to a sponsee today? I've tried it a few times. They want door to door today, you know. And but you know, I was told that good orderly direction comes in very early, and we have, you know, really tough sponsors like you did in AA. AA people had tough sponsors. We had the tough ones too. And Mary told me to call her every morning at 7:30. I said, 7:30 is impossible. My little girl has to get off to school, and my new baby is nursing. She says, you have one free hand and use it. So I did as I was told. And you know, from then on, I saw how things grew. things started to change in my family. And why? Because my focus of attention was off of Joe, and it was working on me. You know, we started on the steps right away. Mary started me right away on the steps, and we started them from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know today we have such wonderful conference-approved literature. We can use our own literature today. We have a 12 and 12. We have that Paths to Recovery, which is the most wonderful book to use. And we have this wonderful new blueprint for progress. I don't know if any of you saw it. It's $7.50, and it's a wonderful tool for helping to change yourselves. And we started to grow together. You know, I was in Al-Anon about 3 months, and the first meeting I went to, she gave me a service commitment, which I guess that's why I'm still in service today, and she made me the greeter at the door. In those days, they had greeters. And she says, you welcome everybody as they come in, show them where the coffee will be served, show them where the literature is, which I did. And 3 months down the line, she says to me one night, Joan, next week when you come in, you're in program 6 months now. I'm changing your position. You're going to be the chairman. And I said, wow, they really know who they've got here. You know, I read that book they gave me, and I read the literature, and I could really do this. So the next week, I went up there an hour early. I even tried to look for a polka dot dress. I wanted to find a polka dot dress so I could look like Mary, but I never found it. And I went there early, and Mary was there waiting for me. And she says, I'm glad you got here early, dearie. I says, well, you told me I'm going to be the chairman. What do I have to read? What do I have to say? And she says, what are you talking about? I says, you told me I'm going to be the chairman. She says, that's right, dearie. You see those chairs on the side of the room? You set them up in rows across. And that's the chairman's job. And you know what that did for me? You know, that big ego that I had that was easing God out, you know, all of a sudden it deflated. You know, I actually fit through my apartment door that night. That head was getting a little too big fitting in, you know? And the night that she told me I was going to be chairman, I'll never forget Joe walking in from his Bronx County meeting, and I says to him, Joe, what do you do in your group? He says, you know I'm the coffee maker. I says, you're still the coffee maker? I mean, he was sober then 6 months. But you know, when I went up and found out that I was just going to put out the chairs and then put them away after the meeting, I never told him that bit for a few months, let me tell you. I had to get past that one. But you know what happened is we began to grow in recovery. How fortunate we are if we have a spouse in recovery today and we're working the Al-Anon Fellowship. God has given you a wonderful gift. Take it, use it well, get yourself a good sponsor, work on yourself, begin to change. This is a program of change. If I don't change the person that brought me in, that same old person is going to take me back out there again, and I'm going to be restless, irritable, and discontent, and my marriage isn't going to last. You know, but by working the program, with God in my life and Al-Anon in my life, I can do anything today. I'm so grateful for that. So we began to grow, and you know that Al-Anon triangle. Well, we used to come out in the beginning, we were at either end, both of us, with boxing gloves on, and we'd argue and fight, and I'd pack his bag and tell him to leave, and then as he'd go to grab the bag to go out, I'd put myself in front of the door, and I'd say, don't you dare. I was so theatrical. You know, but making up was a lot of fun. And so we did all those things, but we grew together. Joe always insisted that I go to an open AA meeting with him on Saturday night, and it has always been like that. I'm so grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous for accepting me. You know, we've been on the humor list for Alcoholics Anonymous for a lot of years with the Al-Anon handshake, and I learned a new one this weekend from Sister Maurice, too. That's a good one, too. But the guys pull it on me all the time. They see me and they automatically know. But I'm so grateful that I've been welcomed by AA all through the years also. It's been a great gift. I have a lot of respect for both programs. In the early years, we were fortunate enough to know Lois and Bill. I was just up at Stepping Stones 3 weeks ago for Lois's picnic. It was a wonderful time. There was about 350 people there. They had great speakers for the day. Lois and Bill were great people. Joe used to go to meetings with Bill, and we would go up to Stepping Stones just to visit, you know, and it was a wonderful place, and it still is. So I'm grateful to those who gave us this wonderful fellowship and came before us. In the years that we are growing up together, I told you, we grew up together in AA and Al-Anon. And We lived up in the Bronx. Joe was sober for his first anniversary. We got our first apartment alone. And then 30 years ago, we moved out to Franklin Square, Long Island, where we met Sally and Keith. And we bought a nice little house and lived there and had our last baby there. Kathleen was born in that house. The other 6 were all grown up in the Bronx. But you know, we grew together. And it was at that time when my son Joseph was 17. He was the high school football jock and all these wonderful things that we started to see signs of alcoholism in him. And he knew what alcoholism was. He went to a lot of his dad's anniversaries. The kids used to be dragged to AA meetings if we had no sitter, or Al-Anon anniversaries if we had no sitter. So they were around. But when the disease comes in the form of a child, God, it's a different story. I knew what it was like to be the wife of an alcoholic, but tell me what it's like to be the mom of an alcoholic. I don't know if you have these meetings out here, but we have parents groups on Long Island. There's 2 of them. I was to one about 2 weeks ago. I spoke for their 37th anniversary. You know, and its parents groups just center on children that are alcoholics. But in those days, I was very affected, and my son, when he got out of high school, decided to join the Marines instead of going to college. But when he came back from the Marines, he was dually addicted. And boy, when that disease walks through your front door in the body of your child, you are devastated. You are whipped. I felt that way. My sponsor, Mary, had already passed away, and I moved out on the island, so I really didn't pick up a new sponsor. If you're waiting to pick up a sponsor, I can't apply that enough. It's so important to have a sponsor in your life, you know. I needed a sponsor. I needed somebody that I could talk to. And I didn't know what to do, but I went to a lot of meetings, and I found my wonderful sponsor at the Franklin Square Decision Group. And she's still my sponsor today. We went through a lot, and I chose her because she had a son who had the problem and a husband who never got sober and died drunk. And I had a husband who was still sober and a son that was out there drinking, so I needed somebody. And we used to go to these parent groups together, and I learned a lot. I learned how to detach. I learned how to not to enable my child and let go and let God and turn him over. You know, take the 3rd step every day with him, maybe 10 times a day. And it was a very difficult thing to do. But in those years were hard, and Joe says to me, let's give tough love, Joan. I think that'll work. And I looked at the back of my index in my books, and I says, tough love is not an Al-Anon word, Joe. I can't do it. All of a sudden, I became Miss Al-Anon. I can't do tough love. And he says, oh, yes, you can. But all we're going to do then is take our 3rd step and turn him over to God, and God is going to handle it. When you completely let go, God is going to work in your life. So, you know, we did that together, and we gave tough love, and the night we put him out on the street, it was horrendous. Kathy remembers. It was a horrendous night. Joe and I sat up all night on the floor in the den. I was crying. I thought my son was going to come back home again, but he didn't. He tried a few times, but he didn't. You know, and then my son lived out on the streets for 3 years, and he could have died. But you know, we must always remember that the alcoholic has a God in their life too. And he loves them just as much as he loves us. And if it's going to happen, it will happen. You know, and on 3 years later, my son went into his 5th rehab. And when we heard that he was in there, you know, every time he went into a rehab, the hopes go up, and you're so excited, and this is going to be it this time. And we were called to the rehab to see if he was allowed to come home after rehab, because he had no home of his own. And I'll never forget Joe and I going up on this Sunday afternoon. And the social worker sat down with us and asked us if he could come home to live. And I found myself saying no. I don't know where that no came from. I'll never forget, because Joe and my son both looked at me. And the no came from, I guess, when God was talking through me, because I wasn't going to set myself up again. I wasn't going to accept unacceptable behavior again. And my son said, I don't know where to go. And Joe said to him, and maybe you should try Graymore. Graymore, New York is a home for men who are homeless. And he gave him money that afternoon, and my son took a bus the following week and went up to Graymore and lived there for 2 more months. And in those 2 months, we went up to visit him one Saturday, and God, he was just coming out of the chapel, and he was walking down the hill. And here is this hunk of a guy. My son was a good-looking guy from his street time. He had lots of tattoos, and he had long hair. but he was beautiful. He was my child, you know. And he came walking towards us, and I saw something different in his face, something different. And he came towards us, and he hugged us both. And he says to me, I'm so happy to see you both. He says, and my life has changed. I felt the Spirit of the Lord. And this disease of alcoholism, I feel, is lifted from me. And I honestly believed that. And we allowed him to come back home and live. And it was the best gift that we could have given ourselves. Because it was at that time that my son came home to live. We made some stipulations. And he went and he joined the same group that Keith belonged to, Franklin Square Decision Group. He got his own sponsor, even though I wanted Joe to sponsor him. I really wanted that to happen, you know. And my son went back to school. He went back to nursing school. I have 5 daughters. None of them became a nurse. My son became a nurse because I'm a nurse. Isn't that a beautiful gift? He became a nurse, and he stayed sober in Alcoholics Anonymous with the help of God and his sponsors. And at his first anniversary, he shared with everybody, I want to thank God, and I want to thank my group, and I want to thank my sponsors for this coin tonight. They give you a coin in New York. He says, and I especially want to thank my mom and dad for throwing me out on the streets when they did. And Mom wanted to crawl under the table and die. But the tears came rolling down, and I know they were good tears. They were good, thankful tears, you know. My son stayed sober for 9.5 years of Alcoholics Anonymous before the good Lord took him. He died from an asthma attack. He had just finished work, and he came off duty and went out to get into his van and felt an asthma attack coming on, went back into the ER. He was an ER nurse at Long Island Jewish Hospital, and he went back in, and within 8 hours' time, they put him on a respirator because he had anaphylactic shock. And watching during that 8-day period, watching my son and bargaining with God, I was bargaining with God again. I went back into my old ways again, bargaining, oh, please, God, don't let this happen. He was just married 2.5 months. It was the happiest time in our life. We had a daughter that was married the month before. Joe and I were living home alone. Joseph was newly married, and Kathleen was engaged to be married at the time. It was a wonderful time in our life. You know, when times you get to the peak of your life and you feel, God, what could go wrong? Well, it went wrong, you know. And I had to learn acceptance, and when he passed away, you know, you don't have to like it, you just have to accept it. And that's what I learned today from my program. I don't have to like it, I just have to accept it, accept God's will, and enjoy and be grateful for the time that we had together. We shared 9.5 years of sobriety. You know, there's not everybody that can say that. And saw him grow to be the man he always wanted to be and never could be. So that's a gift. And it took us a long time as a family to heal. But you people in Al-Anon and AA, you were the greatest gifts that we had. I mean, you cooked, you came to my house, you just took over. The funeral director said he never saw anything like it. There were police barricades outside of the home. You had to stand standing room only to get in, you know. I'm so grateful to all of you people, and I'm so grateful to my family. You know, this was a terrible journey for us to be on. To lose a parent is one thing, you know, but to lose a child is the most devastating thing in the world. But we had each other. Joe and I had each other. And when my son's anniversary came up a year later, one of the best things we ever did was we decided that we all wanted to be together for the whole weekend. And we rented this beautiful home in Amagansett. It had 8 bedrooms. After all, you need 8 bedrooms for our family. And 8 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms. And we went out there on a Friday a.m. and we came home Sunday night. And we had a spiritual retreat for the weekend. We didn't turn on a TV set. We didn't bring our computers or our cell phones. We brought our loving memories of our son. And we shared it with our children. What a gift that was. And we had a service for him at the house Sunday. Oh, I have goosebumps again. It was a beautiful gift. His memory is always with us. His thoughts are always with us. He is with us in spirit, you know. And so we heal from all of those things. We continue to go to Al-Anon, Joe AA. We followed our program. Our children began to heal. 3 months after Joseph passed away, his sister Jamie gave birth to a beautiful baby girl on his birthday. On his birthday. And we went to see Sarah Elizabeth for the first time, and she was brought into her mommy in her room, and Jamie and Jim's parents were there on one side of her bed. Joe and I were on the other side, and the nurse brought in little Sarah Elizabeth, and Jamie looked down at Sarah and said, "Welcome to our family. Did you meet Uncle Joe along the way?" What spirituality. Thank you, Al-Anon, for allowing us to carry the 12th step home to our children and giving them the spirituality and the message that was needed. We brought that home and we gave it to them, and they carry it through today. So it's a wonderful gift. You know, that was 4 years ago. Sarah's now 4. She's a delight. You know, we began to watch her when she was 3 months old when my daughter went back to work. So she was at our house every day, and she used to come running in the door, "Nana, Papa, Nana, Papa," you know, and she's just wonderful. Today she's in school, so I can't believe all these wonderful things. It's a great gift, you know. We heal, we go on. We go to Al-Anon, we go to AA. We talk to God, we bring it home. You know, that's the thing here, the hope, the message of hope. You know, last year when we were with Sally and Keith, Joe and I, we go out on the road a lot. We're asked to speak at conventions and all over the place. And we've always done that. The kids used to say how proud we are of you, Mom and Dad. But whatever we did, we brought it home with us. You know, about, I don't know how many years ago, we got a phone call from 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and Joe picked up a phone in the kitchen, and I picked up one in the bedroom. We have a lot of phones now. A lot of phones, not just one. And we said hello, and it was our grandson, Michael. "Nana, Papa, Nana, Papa." And Joe said, "What is it, Michael?" He says, "Papa, your friends were in my school today." And we said to him, "What friends, Michael?" He says, "You know those people from the A's?" We said, "Yes." He says, "They came to our school today." And Joe says, "Well, that's great, Mike." He says, "But Papa," I raised my hand, and I said, "Oh, my God." And I told them, "You must know my Nana and Papa, because they're in the A's, too." Isn't that a beautiful gift? 3rd generation, and they know where we go to. We never hid from our children. We didn't tell them we were going shopping or to visit a neighbor. We brought home Al-Anon and AA to them. They always knew where they were. They have more aunts and uncles than they would have originally, because all of you are their aunts and uncles. All of you are their family. We are a family. So when we were in Hawaii last year, we met with Sally and Keith, and we had ice cream, we had dinners, we went to meetings. We went to, in Waikiki, we went to quite a few meetings together. We had a great old time. It was so good seeing them. Then they left to go home, and we went on to Maui, so we had a great time. And Joe and I were in a brand new home. We sold our home in Franklin Square last January. It was a year this January. We sold our home to our niece. Our niece wanted to buy it. We never even put it on the market. She said, "I'd love to have that home of recovery. I want something that's in that house." So she bought that house, that house. And she lives there with her husband and 2 little girls. And that was in January. And Joe and I bought a beautiful townhouse in Islip, New York, near the water. We were going to go sailing again. And we lived in the house for 2 nights when we came to Hawaii. And we came home. We were as happy as 2 teenagers. We had more than a couple of boxes still to unpack because we didn't unpack everything. But we were so busy just going to program and meeting new people out in our new area, and Joe sponsoring 3 newcomers already. He was always with the new people, just as I was, and me running back to Franklin Square because I'm still a district rep and a group rep in my old area in Nassau County. And we were leaving for Kansas City May 16th to go. Joe was going to speak at another convention in Kansas City. And we went to bed that night, and we had dinner out with our daughter and granddaughter, Sarah. We have 9 grandchildren today, aren't we lucky, huh? God is good, thank you, God. And we went into bed, and about 10 o'clock, the phone rang, and it was one of my sponsees, Tina. And she wanted to wish us a nice trip, and here's Joe on the phone singing, "Kansas City, here I come." He had a nice voice. Kathleen comes running out of her bedroom. She was living with us then. She says, "What's going on in here?" You know? He says, "I'm just singing to Tina where I'm going." And we fell asleep across the bed, and at midnight, Joe got up to go to the bathroom, and that was his last breath. And that was just a year ago, May 16th, a year. Oh, God, I said, what do I do? What do I do now? You know, we were married 48 years. We spent 42 years in recovery together. What a gift God gave me. His gift of grace, you know, that he gave us to spend 42 years of recovery together. How can I go on without him? Well, look at me. I'm standing here. I can go on without him. He's with me always. The memories are great. This weekend has been stupendous. I put on that white robe this morning after my shower, and I says to Kathy, God, I remember this robe. I remember that Saturday morning, Daddy and I woke up. We took showers and got into our white robes and sat out on the patio and had breakfast. Thank you for those beautiful memories. Thank you for that all. You know, I was married to an alcoholic that I loved very much. He will always be with me. He's with me from the core of my heart, from the core of my spirit, and he always will be. You know, he carried a great message, but you know what? I know I carry a pretty good one too. I'm here. I keep coming back. I came for a quick fix, I said to somebody before, but I stay for the consistency. This is where it all is. I feel very comfortable not only amongst Al-Anon people, but amongst AA people, because you've enveloped me. You've shared your life with me. You've shared your dreams with me, and I want to share mine with yours. Don't give up before the miracle happens. It's worth the trip. It really is. You know, how can I sum up this beautiful experience of being here today, except to thank you with the gratitude from the bottom of my heart. You know, I had a husband who had a gratitude attack every day and shared it with us. He did. That was his big thing. He's known at the Jones Beach meeting as Gratitude Joe. He was a member of that group, too. We have a wonderful meeting out on the beach, Sunday morning, 7 a.m. if you're ever in New York. Parking field, too. I'm still there every Sunday. But when it was going to be Joe's anniversary last month, the children said to me, Mom, what would you like to do for Dad's anniversary? Well, I said, I don't want to have a spiritual retreat like we did for Joe. That was special for Joe. What could we do? And they says, will you tell us, Mom, what would Dad like? I says, what did Dad always like? She said, a meeting. A meeting with his family and his friends around. So my oldest daughter, Debbie, made these beautiful flyers with Joe's picture on it. And it said that we're having a Gratitude Sunday meeting, May 16th, on the anniversary of Joe's passing, at our home. Would you please come? And you know what? 65 people showed up that Sunday, plus my family, who's like 23 now. And we served food and coffee and love. And we sat out on the deck, and we had a spiritual meeting. For an hour and 45 minutes, I asked one of the young men from AA to lead it. And we sat there and had this spiritual meeting, and we asked everybody to share something in gratitude for the day, And while they were sharing, you know, my youngest grandson, the youngest one of the boys, little Joseph John, named after his grandfather, came over to me, and he says to me, put his arms around my neck, and oh, it felt so good. And he says, Nana, look up in that tree. And I looked up in the tree, and there were 2 red cardinals sitting on the tree, looking down at the meeting, not even whistling like they usually do. They weren't even whistling. They were still. And Joseph said to me, do you think that's Papa and Uncle Joe? I says, you betcha it is. Oh, God, have that spirituality, have that awareness. And without Al-Anon, I would never have had any awarenesses. So this has been a wonderful, wonderful, grateful journey that I'm on. You know, the journey is so much more important than the destination. And we were in Maui when we were on the road to Hana. Everybody on this little bus trip couldn't wait to get to the top. They must have thought something was at the top. I don't know what they thought was at the top. But every time we'd get off the bus to go to see a beautiful sight, Joe and I would walk together and hold hands. My sponsee has wonderful movies. She says, you two never let go of each other's hands. I said, maybe we were afraid we were going to fall. But there was one point in Hana, that Sunday on that road to Hana, that we got off the bus and we walked to the edge of a cliff and saw God's beautiful grandeur, God's painting of the world right here in Hawaii, you know? And watching the falls come out of the trees and the mountains and the beautiful exotic flowers and birds, you know. It was just beautiful, and we were still. You know, there's a passage in the Bible, be still so that you can hear. Be still that you can hear. And we heard. And we got back on the bus and we were still quiet and we just sat close to each other. We went to bed that night and he rolled over and he says to me, babe, there was a point today that I felt so warm and touched by God. And I says to him, Joe, I did too. I felt something go through me, like the warmth of something. I says, I thought maybe I was having a spiritual awakening, you know? And he says to me, that was God, Joe. That was God talking to us. All is well. Everything is going to be all right, you know? And little did we know, 4 weeks later, he would join God and my son. So I'm grateful for all those things, and I'm sorry if I got you upset today. But I also made you laugh today, didn't I? And I'm still here. And God bless all of you. Thank you, God, for Al-Anon, and thank you, Al-Anon, for God. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.